Welcome to The Explainer. So today we are digging into this really disturbing new study. It uncovers an organized industrial-scale attack on the very foundation of scientific knowledge. And look, you should forget everything you think you know about a lone scientist faking a result. We are talking about something much, much bigger. A global criminal enterprise. Okay, just to get a sense of the scale here, look at this. I mean, it's pretty staggering. Some publishers are reporting that up to 1 in 7 of their submissions, they think they're fakes, churned out by these so-called paper mills. So, this isn't just a tiny crack in the system. It's a floodgate waiting to burst.
All right, so to really get why this is such a huge deal, you first have to understand the system that's being attacked. The study we're looking at, it describes science as this massive public goods game. Basically, everyone involved, you're talking scientists, universities, publishers, they all have to trust that everybody else is playing fair, that they're honestly contributing to our collective pool of knowledge.
So what happens when that trust gets broken? Well, the paper actually has a name for it: scholarly defection. It's pretty simple, really. It means you're gaming the system for your own personal gain, for the career boost, the recognition, but without actually doing the hard work. And as we're about to see, the evidence here suggests this isn't just a few bad apples. No, it's way more like a systemic.
Okay, so where does an investigation like this even start? Well, the very first clue points to an inside job. It reveals this whole web of corruption right at the heart of the academic publishing world. We're talking about the editors themselves.
So the researchers, they zoomed in on one really big journal. And this journal has used, get this, over 18,000 editors. But here's the thing. In that huge sea of people, a statistical analysis flagged just 45 of them. A tiny, tiny fraction.
And that tiny little group, we're talking less than 1/4% of all the editors. They were responsible for handling over 30% of all the papers that were later pulled back because of fraud. That is just wild.
So yeah, this was not just bad luck. It was a network. The researchers discovered that these same editors were also often the authors, and they were sending their papers to each other for approval. They basically created their own private club, a closed loop, completely bypassing any real, legitimate peer review.
All right, let's move on to the next piece of the puzzle. Because this story, it goes way beyond just a few corrupt people. We are now heading onto the factory floor, where fake science isn't just made, it's mass-produced on an industrial scale.
So how in the world do you trace a factory like that? Well, the investigators found a kind of digital fingerprint, duplicated images. They started collecting all the papers that were flagged for using images, and then they linked them all together. And when they did that, they started to see these distinct clusters pop up. Groups of articles that were obviously, mass-produced in the exact same batch.
And check this out. This chart shows just one of those fake batches, and it totally gives away their strategy. You see, the fake papers, they aren't just spread out randomly. They're heavily concentrated in just a few big-name publishers. And that is some seriously strong evidence that these things were sold as a package deal to those corrupt editors we talked about, the ones inside those specific journals.
So let's be super clear here. We're not talking about some lone fraudster in their basement photoshopping an image. No, this is solid evidence of organized paper mills that are literally manufacturing fake articles and then injecting them into the scientific record in these big coordinated ways.
Now you'd think, right, that once a journal gets caught publishing this kind of garbage, it'd be shut down for good. But these criminal operations are incredibly resilient, and this study shows just how they've pretty much mastered the art of the getaway.
Let's look at a real-life example. There's this fraud broker called ARDA. Back in 2018, it was offering guaranteed publication in about 14 journals. Then, the authorities caught on and de-indexed some of them for shady practices. But did ARDA shut down? Nope. It just dropped the dirty journals, swapped in a bunch of new, clean ones, and kept right on growing. It's a never-ending game of cat and mouse.
And this strategy, this journal hopping, it leaves behind a really clear trail. The analysis found that a journal promoted by a broker, like ARDA, is more than 60 times more likely to get shut down for bad practices than any other journal out there. They are systematically finding and targeting the weakest spots in the entire system.
So, okay, we've seen the corrupt networks. We've seen the getaway tactics, but that all brings us to the true scale of this problem and its absolutely astonishing rate of growth.
This next part really puts the growth into perspective. The total amount of legitimate science in the world, it doubles about every 15 years, which, by the way, is already incredibly fast. Now, compare that to articles that get retracted for fraud. Those double in just over 3 years. But the stuff coming from these paper mills, The estimated output is doubling every 1.5 years. That means this fraud is growing 10 times faster than legitimate science.
So what does that actually mean? It means that our defenses, things like peer review, retractions, de-indexing, they're not just failing to keep up, they are being completely and utterly overwhelmed by the exponential growth of this whole fraudulent enterprise.
Now, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, this sounds really bad for academics, but why should I care? Well, here's why. This is not just some internal problem for science. This pollution of the scientific record, it's a threat to every single one of us.
The risks here are just profound. The scientific literature that we all rely on, it becomes unreliable. Think about AI models. They're trained on this public data, which means they're learning from total nonsense. And what's maybe most concerning of all is that future medical treatments or major public policies could end up being based on completely fabricated findings. And at the end of the day, when the public can't tell what's real anymore, well, trust in science itself just collapses.
And the paper gives this really stark warning about our technology. Even our most advanced AI tools, the ones that promise to help us make sense of all this knowledge, they can't tell the difference between truth and fiction. We are actively feeding a poisoned well of information to the very systems we're hoping will guide us into the future.
So the evidence is pretty clear. The systems we all trust to build and check our knowledge are being systematically corrupted. We've seen that the fraud is organized, it's resilient, and it is growing at an exponential rate. And that leaves us with one final and pretty urgent question. Can the scientific community actually organize a defense before the damage can't be undone?